The Countess sold the barren widow like merchandise. But the Archduke saw what no one else did welcome. Dear listeners, to a journey through time, where the velvet of imperial courts hid sharp thorns, and where a woman without a voice found the most powerful echo of all, the truth of the human heart. This is the story of Katharina von Steinberg, a despised widow who challenged an entire empire not with swords, but with dignity. A woman who learned that true power lies not in golden crowns, but in the courage to stand tall when everyone expects you to kneel. In 1854, in a Vienna covered in snow and prejudice, a woman considered barren, cursed, and unworthy did the impossible. She conquered the heart of an archduke, challenged the most powerful nobility in Europe, and transformed the lives of thousands of forgotten people. Her weapon, only her intact humanity. This is the story of how true love doesn't just choose one person, it chooses an entire people. And you who now listen to me, where do you come from? What lands have brought you to this story? Leave your city, your country in the comments, for stories like this belong to all corners of the world where there are still hearts capable of feeling. Before we begin, I ask, subscribe to this channel and leave your like. Every gesture of yours helps me continue to bring stories that warm the soul and ignite hope. Now take a deep breath. Let's go together. Year winter of 1854, spring of 1863. Location Vienna, Austrian Empire era, the last gasps of old Europe when palaces glittered and the poor died in silence. Snow fell on Vienna like a white shroud, covering the slate roofs and the dreams buried under the weight of conventions. It was January 1854, and winter gripped the imperial city with fingers of ice, but no cold was more cutting than the one that inhabited the Steinberg palace. Katharina von Steinberg, though many refused to call her that, stood before her bedroom window watching the gardens where the snow erased any sign of life. Her slender fingers touched the cold glass, and she imagined that perhaps if she pressed hard enough, she could pass through it and dissolve into the white wind. 14 months. It had been 14 months since Leopold lay in the family mausoleum, and she still bore the weight of being called his widow, though she had never truly been his wife. The black wool dress she wore, the same one she had worn to the funeral as no other had been offered, smelled of mothballs and stalled time. Her dark brown hair, pulled back in a severe bun, mirrored the rigidity the entire house demanded of her. 24 years old, and she seemed to carry 100 years of loneliness on her narrow shoulders. The sound of high heels echoed in the marble hallway. Katharina closed her eyes, recognizing the cadence. 3 quick steps, a calculated pause for dramatic effect, 2 more steps. Countess Maria Theresia von Steinberg, her mother-in-law, was approaching like a storm of silk and venom. The door opened without a knock. Courtesy was a luxury not afforded to barren widows. Still there, standing like a pillar of salt, the Countess's voice had the texture of velvet over blades. She entered, bringing with her the scent of imported roses and the unmistakable smell of refined cruelty. News that should make you dance with gratitude. Katharina turned slowly. Maria Theresia von Steinberg was a 56-year-old woman who defied time with corsets too tight and jewels too heavy. Her emerald green brocade dress contrasted with the cold grey eyes that examined Katharina like a merchant inspects defective goods. I have succeeded after months of negotiations that a woman of your condition could never comprehend. Maria Theresia walked to the small desk where a single letter lay, the letter Katharina had written to Emperor Franz Joseph I, asking for an audience, asking for justice. The Countess picked it up, read a few lines with contempt, and tore it into slow, methodical pieces. Naive creature, do you think the Emperor cares for widows without dowries and non-functional wombs? The silence that followed was as thick as bitter honey. Jakub Sorich, a fabric merchant from Bohemia, needs a wife who can embroider and keep her mouth shut. I offered you. He accepted, provided I included 2 silver candelabras and a promissory note for 500 florins. See how generous I am? I found someone willing to take you. Katharina felt the floor tremble beneath her feet, but her voice came out firm, low, dangerous. I am not merchandise, Countess. I was your son's wife. I deserve. The word exploded from Maria Theresia's lips like a slap. You deserve to give the Steinbergs an heir. You deserve to honor the name so graciously bestowed upon you. 3 years, Katharina. 3 years of marriage and not even the shadow of a child. Leopold was a healthy man. The fault was in you. It always was. The familiar words heard hundreds of times before still burned like a branding iron, but Katharina did not look away. Not this time. You will leave in 6 days, the Countess continued, leaving a sealed envelope on the desk. But before that, you will have your worthy farewell. See, I even got you an invitation to the winter ball at Schönbrunn Palace. Your last night among the civilized before you disappear forever into no man's land." Maria Theresia drew closer, and Katharina could see every wrinkle carefully covered with rice powder, every hard angle of the face that had once been beautiful. "I will have a dress sent. Pearl grey, appropriate for hopeless widows. Wear it, go to the ball. Let everyone see that the Steinbergs fulfill their duties to the end, even with miscalculations like you." And then, like a storm that passes, leaving only destruction, the Countess left. Katharina remained motionless for long minutes. Then, with trembling hands, she picked up the torn pieces of her letter to the Emperor. She pieced them together on the desk, like someone reassembling broken bones to reconstruct a skeleton. "No," she thought as the snow continued to fall outside, "I will not be traded like a pair of candelabras." That night, by the light of a single candle, Katharina began to write another letter. Not to the Emperor, he would never read it, but to herself. An inventory of all she had left: dignity, 2 black dresses, an ivory cameo that had belonged to her mother, and something Maria Theresia had never managed to steal. Her intact soul, 6 days. 6 days until the ball. 6 days until a decision that would change not only her fate, but the fate of an entire empire. The night of January 15th arrived shrouded in fog and unfulfilled promises. The Schönbrunn Palace stood like a giant of stone and gold against the dark sky, its 1,000 windows glowing like the eyes of a sleepless, vigilant creature. Katharina stepped down from the rented carriage, for the Steinbergs had not offered their own, and felt the weight of stairs even before she crossed the main gate. She was not wearing the pearl grey dress Maria Theresia had sent. That lifeless piece of fabric, with its modest ruffles and too high collar, lay folded in her room untouched. Instead, Katharina wore black, black as the moonless night, black as the damp earth over coffins, black as the truth everyone pretended not to see. The dress was velvet, simple but perfectly tailored, with discreet jet applications, polished jet that shone like solidified tears. At her neck, only her mother's ivory cameo. In her hair, no jewels, just a severe hairstyle that exposed the delicate line of her pale face. It was a deliberate insult. Widows did not wear absolute black to balls. They were supposed to soften their mourning with greys, lilacs, half-measures. But Katharina was tired of half-measures. The gates opened. The Hall of Mirrors revealed itself like a fever dream. 300 crystal chandeliers reflected infinitely, creating a universe of light that danced on the golden walls. 300 people, the cream of Austrian nobility, moved in a rehearsed ballet of bows, fans, and calculated smiles. Katharina's name was announced by the herald, and a silence crept through the room like a sudden frost. Heads turned. Fans paused in mid-air, a rising whisper like wind through dry leaves. The Steinberg widow, in absolute black. What audacity! They say she's barren. Poor Archduke to marry that scandal. Katharina descended the 5 marble steps with her head held high. Every step was a declaration, every breath an act of rebellion. From the top of the opposite staircase, invisible to most, Archduke Maximilian von Habsburg watched. He was 28 years old, and had the eyes of someone who carried the weight of an empire that was not yet his. Tall, broad-shouldered, a face carved in lines that could be called handsome if they weren't so severe. He wore the white military uniform with golden frogging, decorated with the imperial insignia that shone like empty promises. He saw her enter, saw the absolute black against the sea of pastel colors, saw the way she didn't bow her head or avert her eyes, and something inside him, something dormant for years under layers of protocol and duty, awakened. It wasn't physical attraction, though she was beautiful in a discreet way, like old paintings that reveal details only to patient observers. It was something else. Recognition. He saw in her the same imperial loneliness that inhabited his own bones, the same golden prison, the same choice between breaking or hardening until you felt nothing at all. "Your Highness," murmured Baron Victor von Albrecht, his advisor at his side, "the woman in black. They say that—" "I know what they say." Maximilian's voice was low, controlled. "And I don't care." Before the Baron could protest, Maximilian was already descending the staircase. The crowd parted automatically. They always did, for imperial blood. The orchestra played a Strauss waltz, romantic and melancholic. Katharina stood beside a column, isolated like an island in a hostile sea. 3 noblewomen passed her with their noses in the air. An old count laughed openly, pointing at the black dress. She didn't react. She just stood erect, dignified, alone, until a shadow fell over her, and a gloved hand was extended in her direction. "Will you grant me this dance, Countess von Steinberg?" Katharina raised her eyes, and found herself face to face with the heir to the throne. The shock shot through her like lightning, but her expression didn't change. Around them, 300 people stifled gasps. Someone dropped a glass of champagne. Archduchess Amalia von Habsburg, Maximilian's stepmother, dropped her ostrich feather fan and her face contorted in ill-disguised fury. "Your Highness," Katharina said softly, "it is not necessary. I do nothing out of necessity. I do it by choice." Maximilian's eyes, blue as ice under a winter sun, held hers. "So, will you dance with me or leave me here looking ridiculous with my hand outstretched?" A muscle twitched at the corner of Katharina's mouth. Almost a smile. Almost. She placed her gloved hand in his, and it was like touching cold fire. They walked to the center of the room, and the crowd retreated like parted water. The orchestra, sensing the moment, restarted the waltz from the beginning. Maximilian placed his hand on Katharina's waist, and they began to twirl. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. The waltz flowed, and with it, the rest of the world began to disappear. Maximilian danced with the military precision of someone trained since childhood, but there was something more, a gentleness in the way he guided her, as if she were made of antique glass, precious and fragile. Katharina danced like one breathes, natural, inevitable. Her feet knew the steps, though it had been years since she had danced. But the real dance was happening elsewhere. In the exchanged glances, the shared silence, the mute understanding of two prisoners recognizing each other through the bars. "Why don't you lower your eyes?" Maximilian asked, his voice husky, private, just for her. Katharina took a deep breath. The room spun around them in a blur of colors and shocked faces. "Because I have lost everything except my dignity. And that, Your Highness, I will give to no one, not even to you." Something changed in Maximilian's face, a softness, a pain. "Good answer," he said. And then, even lower, almost inaudible, "I too have lost everything except my name. Perhaps we are more alike than we imagine." The music ended in a dramatic crescendo. They stopped in the exact center of the Hall of Mirrors, surrounded by 300 pairs of eyes and infinite reflections in the golden mirrors. Maximilian did not release Katharina's hand immediately. He held it for 3 more seconds, long enough for the entire court to understand this was not courtesy. It was a declaration. And when the Archduke finally stepped away, making a bow normally reserved only for princesses of the blood, Katharina knew her life, for better or for worse, would never be the same. 3 days passed like 3 centuries. The sun rose and set over Vienna, but the scandal did not cool. It only grew, fueled by whispers in tea rooms and indignant glares at morning mass. The Steinberg Palace turned into a silent battlefield. Maria Theresia locked herself in her quarters for 2 whole days, emerging only to smash a 400-year-old Venetian mirror against the drawing-room wall. The shattered glass spread across the marble floor like crystallized tears, and no servant dared to clean it without an express order, an order that never came. Katharina, for her part, waited. She waited in her cold room, waited as she watched the snow fall, waited like one waiting for the guillotine blade to fall. Jakob Sorich, the fabric merchant, had sent 2 furious letters demanding explanations. The trip to Bohemia was indefinitely postponed, and that pause, that silence before the storm, was more terrifying than any scream. In the imperial palace, the storm had already begun. Maximilian von Habsburg woke on the morning of January 18th with a certainty as sharp as glass in his heart. He would not let Katharina be sold like cattle. He didn't know exactly what he would do, but he knew that the ball 3 nights ago had changed something fundamental in his internal architecture. He requested, or rather summoned, an extraordinary meeting of the Aulic Council, the body that advised the emperor on matters of state. 16 old men dressed in black frock coats and powdered wigs, though it was 1854, some customs insisted on dying slowly, gathered in the council chamber at 5 in the afternoon. Archduchess Amalia von Habsburg was also present, a protocol absurdity, as women had no voice in the council, but she had demanded entry based on her title as the heir's stepmother. She sat on a gilded chair by the window, dressed in imperial purple, her face a mask of frozen aristocracy. "Gentlemen," Maximilian began, standing before the ancient oak table, "I request your attention on a matter of personal importance." A pause. "I intend to court the Countess Katharina von Steinberg, widow, with a view to marriage." The silence that followed was absolute. Then an explosion. "Impossible," shouted Count von Metternich, secretary of the council. "A widow with no dowry, no proven lineage, no functional womb, say the venomous tongues," completed Baron von Albrecht, casting a calculated glance at Maximilian. "Your Highness, with all due respect, This council has a duty to advise against unions that do not serve the empire. The question of succession, Maximilian interrupted, his voice low but relentless, is not the business of this council until I become emperor. And when that day comes, if it comes, I will make my own decisions. For now I only request your blessing. The word was pronounced with cutting irony. Amalia rose from her chair. Her purple dress whispered like snakes in dry grass. My dear stepson, she began, her voice sweetened with poison, allow me to speak not as part of this illustrious council, but as someone who cares for your well-being. She walked towards him, each step measured, calculated. This woman is how shall I put it, a walking disgrace. Married at 21 to Leopold von Steinberg, 3 years of matrimony, no children, none. There are rumors, and we know that rumors always carry inconvenient truths, that she practices dark arts, Slavic witchcraft inherited from Czech ancestors, that she seduced you with. Enough, the word cracked from Maximilian like a whip. His face, normally controlled, showed a rare emotion, icy fury. I will not tolerate slander against a woman this court has already humiliated enough. If there is witchcraft here, stepmother, it is the witchcraft of cruelty disguised as decorum. The council rumbled like a disturbed beehive. Amalia turned pale, then flushed with anger. But before she could respond, Maximilian continued. The decision is made. I inform this council as a courtesy, not out of a need for permission. Good day, gentlemen. And he left, leaving behind 11 hours of an emergency session that stretched into the dawn. 3 hours later, as twilight was already tinging Vienna with violet and grey, Maximilian found himself walking alone through the orangery, the Imperial Palace's orange grove greenhouse. It was a place of heat and glass, where winter could not enter, and citrus trees grew in porcelain pots, perfuming the air with promises of spring. And there, standing before a blossoming orange tree, was Katerina. She wore the same black dress from the ball, and she looked like a delicate shadow among the green leaves. When she heard his steps, she turned. Their eyes met, and they both realized this meeting was no accident. How did you know I would be here? She asked. I didn't, but perhaps I wished to be where you were. Maximilian approached slowly, like one approaching a wild bird. I got your name from the gatekeeper. You requested entry to walk in the gardens. In the middle of winter. Gardens are honest, Katerina said simply. They don't pretend to be what they are not. Silence. Around them, the scent of orange blossoms and damp earth. The greenhouse glass filtered the twilight, creating a world within a world. I have come to make you a proposal, Maximilian said at last. Not a romantic proposal, but an alliance. A pact. Katerina turned fully towards him. She waited. You need a name no one can take away. Protection no one can violate. I need... He hesitated, and for the first time Katerina saw vulnerability in those icy eyes. I need someone who understands that marriage, in my world, has never been about love. But perhaps it can be about respect, about alliance. Are you proposing marriage? Katerina's voice was low, incredulous. I am offering an agreement. You will have my name, my protection, autonomy to pursue your own interests. I have heard of your visits to the charity hospitals. Yes, I know of that. And in return I ask only for loyalty, discretion, and that you do not force me to feign feelings that may never exist. Katerina studied him for a long time. She saw the man behind the title, someone as imprisoned as she was, as lonely, as tired of beautiful lies. And then, surprisingly, she smiled, not a happy smile, but a smile of recognition. 3 conditions, she said. Maximilian raised an eyebrow. Bold, realistic. First, I maintain my autonomy. I will not be anyone's property, not even yours. Accepted. Second, I will be able to continue my work with the poor and sick without restrictions. Accepted. Third, Katerina took a step forward, and now they were so close they could feel each other's breath. Never ask me to feign feelings that do not exist. If one day there is love between us, it will be real, not staged for others. Maximilian extended his hand. Accepted. But with one condition of my own, I want this in writing. Every term, every condition, so that you have proof should I become inconvenient. Katerina looked at his outstretched hand. Then slowly she placed hers on top of it. Then we have an agreement, Your Highness. Maximilian, if we are to share a name, we can share our own. Maximilian, she repeated, testing the name on her tongue like one tastes an unknown wine. And there, under the orange blossoms and the greenhouse glass, 2 prisoners forged the keys to their freedom. But outside, in the shadows of the empire, Amalia von Habsburg was already sharpening her invisible blades. The war had only just begun. February arrived with cutting winds and ice on the streets of Vienna. The roasted chestnut sellers shouted on smoky corners, children slid on frozen ponds, and in the imperial palace, crown lawyers drafted the document that would unite an archduke and a despised widow. 47 pages. The marriage contract had 47 pages of fine print, clauses nested within clauses, legal Latin intertwined with imperial German. It was delivered to Katharina on a grey afternoon, brought by 3 notaries, who looked at her as if she were a freak of nature, a woman daring to read legal documents. Katharina locked herself in her quarters, no longer in the Steinberg Palace, but in the north wing of the Imperial Palace where she had been temporarily housed. 5 unheated rooms, old and dusty furniture, and a view overlooking the back of the kitchens. A subtle but clear insult, "You are here, but you do not belong." She lit every candle she could find and began to read. Page 1, page 2, page 5. On page 7 her hand stopped. She reread the clause 3 times, making sure she understood it correctly. Then she took a quill, dipped it in red ink, and marked, "The wife shall request permission in writing from the husband for any travel beyond the premises of the imperial palace, with a minimum of 5 business days' notice." A prisoner. They wanted to turn her into a gilded prisoner. Page 12. All correspondence of the wife shall be supervised by the Aulic Council to ensure appropriateness of language and content. Censorship. They wanted to silence her. Page 23. The wife shall abdicate any involvement in charitable institutions not previously approved by the council, such activities being considered improper for a member of the imperial family. A cage. They wanted to cage her. At dawn, when the first grey light entered through the dirty windows, Katharina had identified 7 clauses, 7 chains disguised as legal protections. She marked them all in red, wrote beside each one just 2 words, "Not accepted," and returned the document. The reaction was immediate. The Aulic Council summoned Maximilian for an emergency meeting at 6 in the morning. 16 furious men, their hair dishevelled from interrupted sleep, pointed to the red ink-stained contract as if it were evidence of treason. "Your Highness," Baron von Albrecht began, his voice trembling with indignation, "the woman, the Countess, she marked the contract with red ink, as if she were correcting schoolwork." Maximilian took the document. He read every red mark, and then, to the horror of the council, he began to laugh. Not a polite laugh, but a genuine hearty laugh, the first in years. "She is right," he said, tossing the contract onto the table. "Every one of these clauses is a prison, and I gave my word that she would have autonomy. But, Your Highness, remove 5 of them immediately." Maximilian pointed to the marks. "This one, this one, this one, this one, and this one." The other 2. "I will negotiate with her personally. This is unprecedented. A woman dictating the terms of an imperial contract." "Then let it be the precedent." Maximilian was already walking towards the door. "And next time, gentlemen, write a contract that treats my future wife as a person, not as property. Good morning." But if the council was a visible threat, there were others, more subtle, more venomous, crawling in the shadows. Katharina woke one morning to find that her 2 only maids, Lena and Greta, had been replaced overnight. The new ones were older, with hard gazes and mouths set in lines of disapproval. They didn't speak to her, only performed minimal tasks with abrupt movements that clearly said, "You don't even deserve our courtesy." Her clothes, sent from the Steinberg Palace, arrived torn in strategic places, a sleeve here, a hem there. "Accidents during transport," the messengers explained with malicious smiles. Katharina asked for wool to mend them. They refused. She asked for a needle and thread. They refused. She requested an audience with Maximilian. They informed her he was on a 3-day trip to Salzburg, a lie she knew as she had seen him that morning crossing the courtyard. It was a silent siege, a slow strangulation. On the 4th night of February, alone in her cold room, Katharina made a decision. If they wanted to isolate her, she would find other connections. If they wanted to silence her, she would speak where they couldn't stop her. She put on her simplest coat, not the velvet one with fur trimmings, but a grey wool one a maid might wear. She covered her head with a shawl. And at 4 in the morning, when the palace was still asleep, she slipped through the back corridors, past the kitchens where bakers were already kneading bread, and out through the service gates. Vienna was silent under the recent snow. The streets smelled of fireplace smoke and horses. Katharina walked for 40 minutes until she reached Alsergrund, the poor district, where houses were crammed against each other like crooked teeth. The Hospital of Mercy was a low, dark stone building, with narrow windows and a broken bell in the tower. Katharina knocked on the side door. An elderly nun opened it, startled to see an unknown face at dawn. "I've come to help," Katerina said simply. "We have no money to pay." "I don't want payment. Just let me work." The nun studied her, saw something in those eyes that made her step back and open the door completely. "Come in, child. But I warn you, it's hard here. Tuberculosis, war wounds, bad childbirths. It's no place for delicate ladies." Katerina entered. "Good, because I am not delicate." And there, among blood-stained sheets and the moans of the sick, she found something the palace had never given her: purpose. For 2 weeks, Katerina lived a double life. In the palaces, she was the silent, obedient, almost invisible fiancée. But in the early mornings, she was the hands that changed bandages, the voice that soothed fevers, the presence that told the forgotten, "You matter." And someone noticed. Late one Friday afternoon, as Katerina was leaving the hospital, a simple carriage pulled up beside her. The door opened. Inside, a young woman, no more than 25, dressed in moss green, her blonde hair in elaborate braids, her blue eyes curious. "Countess von Steinberg," the woman said with a tentative smile. "I'm Clara von Traunstein, and may I accompany you tomorrow?" Katerina blinked, surprised. "Accompany me?" "At the hospital. I want to help too, if you'll have me." Thus began an unlikely friendship. Clara, the daughter of a minor count, had privilege but not cruelty. And together, in the weeks that followed, they built something rare in that world of appearances: true solidarity. But in the corridors of the imperial palace, other alliances were also forming. Alliances destined not to build but to destroy. The morning of March 8th dawned shrouded in a fog so thick it seemed as if all of Vienna had been swallowed by a liquid ghost. The church spires disappeared into the white, sounds were muffled, and even the bells rang with a mournful voice. Katerina woke up alone in her quarters in the north wing. No maid came to dress her, no word of encouragement, just the heavy silence of a day that would change everything, and simultaneously nothing. She brushed her own hair, braided it into a low bun, and put on the only appropriate attire she owned, an ivory-colored silk dress, not white, because widows did not wear white, with Brussels lace embroidered by the charity sisters from the hospital. The same hands that healed also embroidered tiny roses along the neckline and sleeves. It was simple, but every stitch was a silent prayer. At her neck, her mother's ivory cameo. Nothing else. No jewels, no diadem, no gold. Just herself, stripped of artifice. At 9:45, a closed carriage arrived at the back of the palace. Not even the imperial carriage, just a plain dark one without a coat of arms. Katerina got in alone. No lady in waiting. No member of the Steinberg family. Just her and the mute coachman. The Augustinerkirche, the Augustinian church, stood in the heart of Vienna next to the imperial palace. It was where all the Habsburgs had married for 300 years. But when Katerina stepped out of the carriage, she found only silence. Of the 200 expected guests, 43 had shown up. 43 souls scattered among the dark oak pews like islands of boredom or morbid curiosity. Katerina recognized some. Emperor Franz Joseph the Friesen in the front row, his face expressionless. Baron von Albrecht with a disapproving air. Clara von Traunstein at the back, smiling shyly, and Maria Theresia von Steinberg, sitting in the darkest corner, dressed in absolute black as if attending a funeral. There was no procession along the Ringstrasse, no solemn Te Deum, no children throwing flowers. Katerina walked alone down the central aisle, each step echoing against the stone vaults. The organ was silent, just the sound of her breath and the creak of her shoes. At the altar, Maximilian waited. He wore a white military uniform, impeccable, but his face was pale, tense. When their eyes met, something passed between them. Not love, not yet, but recognition, complicity. "We are both doing this, together, alone, Father Anselm." An old man with trembling hands began the ceremony. His voice was low, monotonous, as if reciting a shopping list. The Latin flowed without emotion, hollow words ricocheting off the cold walls. "Maximilianus Franciscus Josephus, do you take this woman?" "I do." "Caterina Adela Margareta, do you take this man?" "I do." The rings were exchanged. Simple gold, no stones, no elaborate engravings, just closed circles. "You may kiss the bride." Maximilian and Katharina looked at each other. For a moment they hesitated. Then he took her hand, not her face, her hand, and squeezed it firmly. A handshake, like partners, like allies. 22 minutes, the shortest ceremony ever recorded for an imperial wedding. There was no celebration, no banquet. The 43 guests dispersed like fog in the sun. Katerina was taken directly to her new quarters, still in the north wing, still in the 5 cold rooms, but now officially as an archduchess. The view from the window was the same. The Augustinian cemetery with its moss-covered tombstones and crows perched on stone crosses. A fitting view for a bride of ashes, she thought bitterly. That night, a letter was slipped under her door. Katharina recognized Maximilian's handwriting, elegant, controlled, without unnecessary flourishes. I do not promise love, but I promise honor. That will have to suffice for now. Katharina folded the letter, put it in a drawer, and sat by the window. Outside, the fog was finally dissipating, revealing cold, distant stars. She was now an archduchess. She had a new name, a new position. But as she looked at her reflection in the glass, she saw the same woman as always, alone, fighting, intact. And she knew that the real battle was just beginning. March melted into April, and with the spring came flowers and vipers. Katharina woke every morning at 5, long before the palace awoke. She dressed herself, as the assigned maids always forgot to show up, and headed to the Hospital of Mercy. There, among consumptives and war widows, she found something the palace denied her: simple humanity. But her absences did not go unnoticed. Archduchess Amalia von Habsburg, Maximilian's stepmother and supreme antagonist, had eyes everywhere. Bribed maids, guards who owed old loyalties, counselors who whispered poisons into willing ears. It was at an afternoon tea, a weekly event where noble ladies gathered to talk about nothing while destroying reputations, that Amalia launched her first real offensive. The Austrian tea room had yellow silk walls and portraits of dead empresses looking down from above. 20 women sat in gilded chairs, wearing pastel-colored dresses, fanning themselves, their jewels sparkling. Katharina had been invited, an order disguised as a courtesy. She arrived 5 minutes late, deliberately, and sat in the only available chair, far from the center, near the door, the position of lowest status. Amalia presided from the central throne, dressed in cobalt blue, a sapphire diadem sparkling in her steel-colored hair. Her eyes, when they landed on Katharina, were those of a predator sizing up its prey. Our dear Archduchess finally joins us," Amalia said, her voice as sweet as poisoned honey. "We were just discussing family origins. Lady Margarethe here has French ancestors. Countess Wilhelmina descends from the Medici. And you, dear Katharina, your family. Hoffmann, wasn't it? A family of merchants, I heard?" A calculated silence. 20 pairs of eyes turned. Katharina sipped her tea slowly. "My family worked with fabrics, yes. Honest work, unlike some families who have lived off rent stolen from the poor for generations." A flutter of fans, uncomfortable coughs. Amalia smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Honest work. How charming. But tell us, dear, is it true you have Czech blood? I heard rumors that your grandmother practiced, how shall I put it, folk arts, spells perhaps?" "My grandmother was a midwife," Katharina said quietly, each word a cold blade. "She saved more lives than all of us in this room together will ever save with our facade charities." "Saved lives, yes, but she couldn't save your own fertility, could she?" The bomb was dropped casually, as one might comment on the weather. 3 years with Leopold von Steinberg, no children, and now married to the heir to the throne, and yet, what, 5 weeks? 6? And no announcement of an heir in sight. The women leaned forward like carnivorous flowers. This was what they wanted, blood. Katharina placed her teacup on the saucer with a soft click. "My fertility, Archduchess, is not a topic for afternoon tea, but since you show so much interest in the lives of others, perhaps you should spend more time on your own. I heard the Archduke rarely visits your chambers." "For how long now? 5 years?" A deathly silence. Amalia turned pale, then red. Her fan snapped shut. "How dare you?" "I dare because I am tired of drawing-room games, while people are starving 3 blocks from here." Katharina stood up, her moss-green dress whispering. "Good afternoon, ladies. I hope your embroidery and slander keep you warm at night." And she left, leaving behind 20 open mouths and an Amalia trembling with fury. The war was declared, and Katharina had just chosen a side, her own. The retaliation was swift and cruel. The next morning, 3 of Katharina's private letters, addressed to Clara von Traunstein, discussing improvements at the hospital, were read aloud during the court's breakfast. Every harmless word was twisted. "We need more medicine" became, "She is diverting imperial funds." "The children are hungry" became, "She accuses the empire of negligence." Katharina only learned of the incident when a messenger arrived at the hospital with an order for her immediate appearance at the palace. She returned still wearing her apron, stained with the blood of a difficult birth. She found Maximilian in the imperial library, surrounded by old books and restrained anger. He held the intercepted letters. "An explanation?" he asked, his voice tense. Katerina did not look away. "I have none. Those letters were private. Someone stole them. I know that. But the council is demanding that I restrict your activities. They say you are causing a scandal, that I am saving lives." "Yes, what a horrible scandal." Maximilian ran a hand over his face. He looked older, tired. "Katerina, I defend you. Every day. But there are limits. If you continue to openly defy Amalia, she will destroy you. And I may not be able to stop her." Katerina approached him. She took the letters from his hands. "Then don't defend me. Let me fight my own battles. And if I fall, let it be as myself, not as a puppet following rules that exist only to keep us imprisoned." He looked at her for a long time. Then, surprisingly, he smiled, a sad but genuine smile. "You are dangerous, you know. Not with weapons, but with truths. And are you a coward?" she challenged softly. "No, just tired of fighting wars that seem impossible to win." "Then rest," Katerina said, "and let me fight for both of us." During May and June, Katerina intensified her work, not just at the Hospital of Mercy, but also at the Asylum for the Insane, the madhouse where the insane were chained to damp walls, and at the House of the Penitents, a shelter for fallen women, prostitutes, and victims of violence, places no archduchess had ever visited. Her reputation among the people grew like fire in dry straw. Children ran to hug her skirts when she passed. Old women cried and kissed her hands. Men with faces scarred by war took off their worn hats in reverence. Engel der Armen, they called her, angel of the poor. But in the palaces another name circulated, witch. Amalia carefully spread rumors that Katharina used pagan herbs in her cures, that she whispered Slavic enchantments over the sick, that her own barren womb was divine punishment for pacts with demons. The maids who served her were instructed to report her every move, what she ate, what books she read, how much time she spent alone. Everything was recorded, distorted, turned into evidence of perversion. One day Clara von Traunstein came to the palace, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Katerina, you have to stop. Amalia is—" "She is building a dossier. She has 20 pages of testimonies against you. She says she will present it to the council, perhaps to the emperor himself." Katerina was embroidering a towel for the hospital. She didn't stop. "Let her. I have nothing to hide." "But she will make things up. She will say you—" "Clara." Katerina looked at her friend. "If I stop now, they win. And if they win, all the women after me will be trapped forever in the golden cages they've built. I would rather burn than kneel." And then something unexpected happened. On a hot July afternoon, while Katerina was changing the bandages of a soldier wounded in the Lombardy War, a figure entered the hospital, a tall, dressed in simple civilian clothes, a brown linen coat, a common hat. But she recognized the eyes. "Maximilian?" she murmured, incredulous. He took off his hat. "I came to see what you do, to see who you really are." And there, disguised as a civilian doctor, Archduke Maximilian von Habsburg worked alongside his wife for 3 hours. He saw how she held the hand of a woman dying of tuberculosis, whispering that she was not alone. He saw how she cleaned gangrenous wounds without hesitation. He saw how she hugged an orphaned child who wouldn't stop crying. When they left, it was already night. They walked side by side through the dark streets of Alsergrund. "They call you a saint," Maximilian said quietly. "And a witch. But I see now you are just human, fiercely, inconveniently human." Katerina didn't answer, but for the first time her fingers sought his, and he didn't let go. In the shadows, Amalia's observers noted everything, and the net was closing. The invitation arrived on cream paper with gilded edges. Benefit concert in honor of the needy of Vienna. Staatsoper, August 3rd, 1854. Katharina read the invitation 3 times, looking for the hidden trick. Charity organized by the court always meant nobles wearing their best jewels while donating crumbs and expecting applause. But Maximilian insisted she attend. "You will speak," he said simply. "Speak about what?" "About the truth. Something they need to hear even if they don't want to." The State Opera House stood like a temple of marble and red velvet. That night, 300 members of the Viennese elite filled the boxes. Silk dresses, embroidered tailcoats, diamonds sparkling like stolen constellations. The orchestra played Mozart, the singers' voices rising to the ceiling painted with angels and gods. Katerina sat beside Maximilian in the imperial box. She wore dark burgundy, a forbidden color for a recent widow, a deliberate scandal. Her only adornment was a black velvet choker with a cameo. Amalia, 3 boxes to the left, noticed the color, and her face contorted. She whispered something to a lady beside her, who laughed behind a feathered fan. After the first act, there was an intermission. Baron von Albrecht took the stage, all oily smiles, and announced, "Illustrious ladies and gentlemen, we gather today in this temple of culture to, in our infinite generosity, offer aid to the less fortunate." Empty words flowed like wine into crystal glasses. He spoke of numbers, of coins, of our Christian duty. The audience applauded politely, bored but satisfied with their own benevolence. Then Maximilian stood up. The conversation died. "I would like to invite my wife, Archduchess Katharina, to share a few words about the work she carries out daily with the poor of Vienna." A murmur ran through the audience like a cold wind. Women did not speak in public. Not like this. Not about serious topics. Katharina felt 300 pairs of eyes on her. She felt the weight of expectation, of judgment, of the hope that she would fail. For a moment she hesitated, then she stood up. She descended the stairs of the imperial box, each step echoing. She stepped onto the stage where opera singers performed for kings. The light from the chandeliers was hot against her face, the silence absolute. She took a breath and began. "I do not come to speak of numbers in ledgers or of coins in coffers." Her voice was low but clear, trained in noisy hospitals and deathbeds. "I come to speak of Anna, 9 years old, who embroiders handkerchiefs with burned fingers to buy bread. Of Franz, a 45-year-old soldier who lost his legs in Lombardy defending this empire and now begs on the Stephansplatz. Of Margaret, a 30-year-old widow with 4 children who works 16 hours a day and still cannot afford medicine." A visible discomfort in the audience. People shifting in their seats. Fans moving faster. "I come to speak of Johann, 7 years old, who sleeps on the street because his parents died of cholera. Of Elizabeth, 63, who served noble families for 40 years, and now blind and broken has been discarded without a pension. Curve Thomas, 17, who works in the textile factories for 18 hours and returned yesterday with his hand crushed by a machine and was fired the same day." Katharina paused. Her eyes swept the audience, meeting embarrassed faces, some hostile, some with restrained tears. "They do not need our pity. Pity is looking down from above, feeling superior. They need our justice. They need laws that protect children from deadly labor. Hospitals that do not turn them away for lack of payment. Dignity. They need for us to be forced to remember that, under these silk dresses and embroidered tailcoats, we are made of the same flesh, the same blood." Her voice did not rise. It didn't need to. The words carried the weight of truths that most in that room spent their entire lives avoiding. "Tonight we will donate coins and go home satisfied with our goodness. But tomorrow Anna will still burn her fingers. Franz will still beg. Margareta will still work until she collapses. And we will sleep in warm beds, dine on imported porcelain, and wonder why God allows so much misery in the world, without ever looking in the mirror and realizing that we are the ones who perpetuate it." Silence. 12 seconds of absolute silence. The kind of silence that comes before earthquakes. Then a sound. Applause. Slow. Deliberate. Maximilian had stood up alone in his box, clapping with eyes shining with something that could be pride. For 5 full seconds he applauded alone. Then Emperor Franz Joseph II stood and joined the applause. Like waves, the entire room rose. 300 people applauding. Some genuinely moved, others out of obligation, but applauding. The very structure of the opera seemed to tremble. Katharina descended from the stage with trembling legs. When she reached her seat, Maximilian took her hand and whispered, "You have just made history, and they will never forgive you for it." He was right. But Katharina also knew some acts are worth damnation. September arrived with rains and golden leaves falling on Vienna. The autumn smelled of wet earth and change, and something in the air felt different, charged like before a storm. Katharina was at the Hospital of Mercy on a Friday morning, changing the bandages of a blacksmith who had lost 3 fingers in an accident. The man groaned quietly, but thanked her through clenched teeth. Clara was beside her, preparing herbal compresses. The door opened. Katharina didn't need to look to know who it was. She already recognized Maximilian's steps. "But he never came unannounced, never in broad daylight, never." She turned. He was at the entrance, still wearing his formal uniform from the morning council meeting. His hair was disheveled, his face tense. Behind him, no guards, no advisors. Alone. "We need to talk." His voice was hoarse, urgent. Clara got the message. She finished securing the bandage and left discreetly, closing the door. Katharina washed her hands in a basin of cold water. She dried them with a clean cloth. She waited. "Why does everyone say you are barren, when there is clearly a truth I do not know?" The words came out abruptly, without preamble. Maximilian took 2 steps forward. 5 months. We have been married for 5 months. The council pressures me daily. Amalia spreads rumors that you are cursed, but something doesn't add up. The way you care for children, how you hold babies. There is pain there, a history. Katerina turned slowly. She met his eyes, blue, intense, demanding the truth. Do you want to know? She asked quietly. Do you really want to know why I am called Baron? Yes. She took a deep breath. Then she walked to a side room, a small office where the doctor kept records. She closed the door. There, among shelves of medical books and the smell of ink, she began to speak. I became pregnant 8 months after marrying Leopold. Her voice was low, controlled, but trembled at the edges. I was 21. I was scared but happy. Leopold. He smiled when he found out. I think it was the only time I ever saw him truly happy. Maximilian leaned against the wall, arms crossed, but his eyes never left her. Maria Theresia reacted differently. She said pregnancy was no excuse for weakness, that von Steinberg women did not indulge in feminine melancholies. She demanded I maintain all social appearances, hunts, balls, carriage rides on bumpy roads. Katerina's breathing became more difficult. In the 3rd month I started bleeding. I asked to be put on bed rest. She laughed, said I was being dramatic, that her own pregnancies had been flawless. When the bleeding worsened, Leopold tried to intervene. Maria Theresia called him weak, manipulated by a hysterical wife. Maximilian didn't move, but his face had turned pale. By the 4th month, I was bleeding so much I could barely walk. I begged for a doctor. Maria Theresia locked me in my chambers. She said, a true von Steinberg does not give in to weakness. She left me there alone for 2 days. Katerina closed her eyes, but the tears escaped anyway. I lost the child alone, on the floor of my room. There was so much blood I thought I was dying, and a part of me wanted to die. I wanted to go with my child, because at least there we would be together. A sob escaped her. Maximilian pushed himself off the wall, took a step, but she raised her hand, asking for distance. Leopold found me. He carried me to bed. He finally called a doctor. It was too late. The doctor did what he could, but when he finished, he said my womb was so damaged I might never conceive again. He said I was lucky to be alive. Silence. Maria Theresia came to see me 3 days later. Do you know what she said? Katerina looked at Maximilian, her eyes burning with tears and anger. See what your weakness has caused. You killed my grandson with your hysterics. She never apologized, never. And when Leopold died 2 years later, she blamed me too, said I had broken him with my barrenness. Maximilian was trembling, not from fear but from contained fury. Why didn't you tell anyone this? Why didn't you... To whom, Maximilian? Katerina laughed bitterly. Who would believe a wife against the word of a countess? Women have no voice. You know that better than anyone. Our bodies, our pains, our truths, none of it matters when powerful men and women decide to write our stories. He took another step, and another, until he was in front of her. And then, to her absolute shock, Maximilian von Habsburg, Archduke of the Austrian Empire, began to cry. Not silent tears, sobs, the kind of crying that comes from long-locked places. Forgive me, he said, his voice broken. Forgive me for all the times I heard the rumors and didn't question them. Forgive me for every moment I was too cowardly to see that the empire I serve is built on destroying people like you. Katerina, surprised, reached out. She touched his face. You didn't know. I should have known. I must know. He took her hand, held it like one holds an anchor in a storm. You have infinite worth, Katerina. And I will prove it to the world. I swear on everything I am. There in that small room smelling of ink and medicine, 2 human beings, he the heir to an empire, she a despised widow, found something rare, unarmed truth. And truth, they discovered, was the beginning of what could become love. October arrived with cold winds and deep cobalt skies. The trees of Vienna bled red and gold, and the air tasted of imminent change. The Emperor Franz Joseph I's birthday ball was the most important event on the imperial calendar. 500 guests from 7 different nations, ambassadors in medal-covered uniforms, nobles in their most scandalous jewels, and the imperial orchestra playing Strauss waltzes that made the walls of the Hofburg tremble. Katerina spent 3 days preparing, not because she cared about appearances, but because she knew tonight would be a statement. When she entered the Hall of Mirrors at 8 o'clock, the silence was instant, absolute, as if someone had sucked all the air out of the room. She wore purple, imperial purple, the forbidden color worn only by direct members of the ruling family. The dress was of sumptuous velvet, almost black in the shadows, but glowing deeply under the light of the chandeliers. Embroidered in gold thread all over the bodice and skirt were phoenixes, mythical birds rising from the ashes, wings spread flying upwards. Her hair was down, another breach of protocol, falling in brown waves over her shoulders, and on her head, a tiara of amethysts and diamonds, jewels from the personal imperial collection. Maximilian had ordered everything in secret. Every stitch, every stone, every detail was a message. She belongs here. She is my equal. Katerina descended the marble stairs. The murmuring began like a distant storm. Purple. How dare she? Imperial jewels, scandal, arrogance. But Maximilian was already coming up the steps to meet her. He wore a white military uniform, decorated to impossibility, but his eyes were only on her. He stopped before Katerina. He extended his hand. She placed hers on his, and together they descended to the exact center of the Hall of Mirrors. 500 people watched. Ambassadors from Prussia, France, Russia, the Emperor Franz Joseph himself, seated on a raised throne, and Amalia von Habsburg, who had stood up, her face contorted in unrestrained fury. Maximilian did not let go of Katerina's hand. Instead, he brought it to his lips, but he did not kiss the back of her hand as was customary. He turned it over and kissed her palm. A kiss on the palm signified absolute equality. It was a gesture reserved only between monarchs, between equals in power and status. To do it publicly was a political, social, explosive declaration. The murmur turned into a roar. Someone choked on a gasp. A Prussian ambassador dropped his glass of champagne. Then Maximilian turned to the emperor. His voice echoed through the hall. Your Imperial Majesty, I present to you my wife, my choice, my equal. 5 seconds. Emperor Franz Joseph, though, studied Katerina. She did not lower her eyes. She did not make a too deep curtsy. She just inclined her head, respect, not submission. And then Franz Joseph smiled, a small but genuine smile. He rose from his throne, descended the 3 steps, walked to Katerina, took her hand and kissed it. Welcome to the family, Archduchess. May your fire light our dark corridors. The room erupted in applause, some genuine, others out of obligation, but all applauding. One by one, 500 members of the highest European elite bowed. Ambassadors bowed. Countesses who had mocked her now smiled through clenched teeth. And Amalia von Habsburg, realizing she had lost, that the emperor himself had legitimized Katerina, stood motionless like a statue. Then, without taking her leave, without a curtsy, she turned and left the room. That very night, her carriages left Vienna loaded with trunks and hatred. Maria Theresia von Steinberg was present, hidden in a dark corner. Katerina saw her, the mother-in-law who had destroyed her, who had killed her unborn child. And instead of anger, she felt only emptiness, pity perhaps. Maria Theresia held Katerina's gaze for 3 seconds. Then she turned and disappeared behind the curtains. She left Vienna before dawn. She never returned. But the most unexpected moment came later, when the orchestra began to play again and conversations resumed. A child, a boy of perhaps 7, dressed in clothes too simple to be there, appeared between the columns. Johann, one of the orphans Katerina cared for at the hospital. He held a makeshift crown of wildflowers, daisies, and carnations, tied with string. No guard stopped him, perhaps too shocked to act. Johann ran to Katerina, his eyes wide, and held out the crown. "You are our real princess," he said, his high-pitched voice cutting through the noise of the room. "The princess who doesn't forget us." Katerina knelt. She took the crown of flowers, and before 500 witnesses, she placed it over the amethyst diadem. "Thank you, Johann," she whispered, hugging the boy. "This is the crown I choose to wear." That night, as they returned to their chambers, Maximilian held Katerina's hand. "You know there will never be peace again, right? Amalia will conspire from exile. The council will resist. There will be battles." Katerina smiled, and this time it was a true radiant smile. "Then let there be battles, because now finally we are fighting together." And for the first time in years they both felt a forgotten thing, hope. Winter returned to Vienna with sharp winds and snow that covered the city's sins. December 1854 was a month of secret meetings, whispers in dark corridors, and coded letters crossing borders. Amalia von Habsburg had not disappeared after her dramatic exit from the ball. Exiled in Munich, in a palace lent by the Wittelsbachs, who would soon regret their generosity, she conspired. Letters came and went. Old contacts were activated. And slowly, methodically, she began to weave her final web. The Aulic Council met on a grey afternoon. 16 men, their faces grave, entered the council chamber, carrying sealed dossiers. Maximilian was summoned at 4 o'clock. When he entered, the atmosphere was funereal. Baron von Albrecht stood, holding a heavy envelope, his expression grim. "Your Highness, we have received disturbing information." His voice trembled. not with fear but with ill-disguised malicious anticipation. Archduchess Amalia, exiled but still concerned for the well-being of the Empire, has sent us documents that demand immediate investigation. Maximilian sat down slowly. What documents? Von Albrecht opened the envelope. Inside 3 letters apparently written by Katharina. He spread them on the table. The letters were addressed to the Brothers of Hungarian Liberty, a revolutionary movement seeking to separate Hungary from the Austrian Empire. The content was incendiary, discussions of escape routes for dissidents, mentions of overthrowing the tyranny of Vienna, references to the empire must be brought down from within, a deathly silence. They are forgeries, Maximilian said immediately, his voice icy. With all due respect, Your Highness, the handwriting has been examined by 3 experts. They all confirm it is that of Archduchess Katharina. Maximilian took the letters. He studied them. The handwriting was indeed convincing, almost perfect. But there was something wrong with the rhythm of the words, the choice of vocabulary. I demand to see Katharina now. Your Highness, these are accusations of high treason. We have protocols. Now! The council backed down. Messengers were sent. 30 minutes later, Katharina entered the council chamber still wearing her hospital apron, her hair hastily pinned up. Her eyes met Maximilian's. He was standing tense but not hostile, a sign that he believed her. Archduchess, Baron von Albrecht began, his voice oily. Do you recognize these letters? Katharina took them. She read them quickly. Her face turned pale, not with guilt but with shock. I never wrote this, never. The handwriting can be copied. Any competent forger could do it. But the personal references, details about your routine, details that any bribed maid could provide. Katharina placed the letters on the table with a controlled gesture. This is a setup, and we all know by whom. Archduchess Amalia is a lady of reputation. Archduchess Amalia, Katharina interrupted, her voice cutting, has spent the last 8 months trying to destroy me. And now desperate, she resorts to forgeries and accusations of treason, the council murmured. Some seemed genuinely undecided, others clearly pleased with the drama. Maximilian stepped forward. Gentlemen, I ask for 24 hours to investigate the origin of these letters. If they are genuine, I will personally present my wife to imperial justice. But if they are false, his voice dropped, dangerous, we will find who fabricated them. A motion was granted. 24 hours. And Maximilian had a plan. Maximilian did not sleep that night. At the first rays of sun, he was already riding through the streets of Vienna, not to the imperial palace, but to the Leopoldstadt district, where the artisans, merchants, and those whose skills flourished in the shadows of the law lived. He found the person he was looking for in a bookbinding workshop, an old man named Herr Steinmetz, known to be the best document forger in Vienna, and also for having a strange code of honor. He forged, but never to cause death or grave injustice. I need you to examine some letters, Maximilian said, entering unceremoniously. Steinmetz looked up from a printing press. He recognized his visitor. All of Vienna would recognize the Archduke, but he did not bow. Show me. Maximilian held out the 3 letters. Steinmetz put on thick glasses, lit an oil lamp and began to examine them. He ran his fingers over the paper. He smelled the ink. He held the pages up to the light. A forgery, he said after 5 minutes. A good one, but not perfect. The ink is too recent, 3 weeks at most. The paper is from Munich, not Vienna. And look here, too, he pointed to a specific letter. The K in Katharina. Whoever wrote this studied her handwriting, but doesn't have the same natural angle. It's copied, not fluid. Can you identify the forger? Steinmetz laughed dryly. There are only 3 people in all of Europe capable of forgery at this level. One is dead. Another is in prison in Paris. The third works for whoever pays well. His name is Dietrich Schreiber, and he was recently seen in Munich. Maximilian felt the blood run cold in his veins. Munich, where Amalia is in exile. A coincidence, surely, Steinmetz said with irony. Maximilian returned to the imperial palace before noon. He summoned not the full Aulic council, but only 3 people, Emperor Franz Joseph I, Baron von Albrecht, and Katharina. In the lesser throne room, he presented the evidence. The emperor listened in silence, his face expressionless. Von Albrecht grew progressively paler. Dietrich Schreiber, Maximilian said, tapping his finger on the table, was seen in Munich 3 weeks before these letters arrived in Vienna. He was hired to forge compromising correspondence. And you know who has a residence in Munich at this very moment. Archduchess Amalia, the emperor said quietly. This is a grave accusation, Your Highness. Von Albrecht tried to protest. We cannot simply. I can and I will. The emperor stood up. "Baron, send an immediate detachment to Munich. Bring Dietrich Schreiber to Vienna, alive, and send a message to Amalia. She has 48 hours to return and answer for these accusations." Von Albrecht, realizing the tide had turned irrevocably, bowed and left hastily. The emperor turned to Katharina. "Archduchess, my deepest apologies for this offense. I should have better protected my family from internal vipers." Katharina inclined her head. "Your Majesty, vipers teach us to watch where we step. This lesson has not been wasted." 3 days later, the Aulic Council met again. This time, 23 members were present, an extraordinary expansion that included ministers of justice and military commanders. Dietrich Schreiber was brought in chains. Thin, nervous, with shifty eyes, faced with the evidence and the threat of execution for treason, he confessed in 10 minutes. "I was hired by Archduchess Amalia von Habsburg. She provided samples of Archduchess Katharina's handwriting. She paid me 500 florins, half in advance, half upon delivery. The letters were created in Munich, brought to Vienna by a messenger." A sepulchral silence. Then Maximilian stood up. His voice echoed through the stone vaults. "Amalia von Habsburg did not just attack my wife. She attacked the honor of the crown by trying to manipulate this council with fabricated lies. She tried to use imperial law as a weapon against an innocent. This, gentlemen, is not palace intrigue. It is treason." Emperor Franz Joseph I already held the decree that would seal Amalia's fate. He read it aloud. "For the attempted defamation of a member of the imperial family through documentary forgery and conspiracy to cause instability to the state, Amalia von Habsburg is stripped of all titles, incomes, and imperial protections. She has 48 hours to leave all territories of the Austrian Empire. Unauthorized return will be treated as a hostile invasion." The imperial seal was pressed into red wax. It was done. That night, in the chambers that were now truly hers, redecorated, heated with a view of the imperial gardens, Katharina was by the window when Maximilian entered. He said nothing. He just approached, knelt before her. "Maximilian, what? Forgive me," he said, his voice hoarse. "I began this marriage out of duty, as a cold, convenient agreement. But somewhere between your hands healing the wounded and your voice defending the forgotten, I fell in love. Not with the princess you became, but with the woman you always were. Forgive me for taking so long to see." Katharina knelt too, bringing herself to his level. She held his face between her hands. "Do not kneel. Not for me, not for anyone. Walk beside me as an equal always." And there, finally, they kissed. Not for protocol, not for show, but because two imprisoned hearts had found in each other the only freedom that mattered. The war was won, but the real journey was just beginning. April 1855 arrived with explosions of color. The Belvedere gardens turned into oceans of red and yellow tulips. The chestnut trees bloomed in white and pink, and all of Vienna seemed to have awakened from a long, cold sleep. Katharina organized a picnic for 50 orphaned children on the lawns of the Belvedere. White linen cloth spread on the grass, baskets of fresh bread, cheese, fruit. The children ran, laughed, played ball with a mended cloth. For the first time in months, Katharina allowed herself to simply be. Maximilian was by her side, teaching a 6-year-old boy how to make a paper boat. Clara von Traunstein distributed slices of cake. Even Emperor Franz Joseph had made a brief appearance, surprising everyone, and accepted a bouquet of daisies from a shy girl. It was 11 in the morning when an imperial messenger arrived on horseback, sweaty and breathless. He dismounted quickly, bowed, and held out a scroll of parchment sealed with the Empire's seal. Maximilian took it. He broke the seal. He read. His eyes widened, then met Katharina's. "It's for you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. Katharina took the parchment. Her hands trembled as she unrolled it. And then she read, "Imperial Decree, in recognition of extraordinary services to the population of Vienna, for tireless dedication to the poor, sick, and forgotten, and for representing the highest values of compassion and justice, His Imperial Majesty Franz Joseph I, Emperor of Austria grants Katharina Adela Margarete von Habsburg the unprecedented title of Kaiserliche Prinzessin des Volkes, Imperial Princess of the People. This title grants an annual budget of 50,000 florins for the founding and maintenance of charitable institutions, legal authority to create hospitals, schools, and shelters without prior approval from the Council, a permanent seat on the Council for Social Affairs, the first woman in 300 years of imperial history to hold such a position, imperial protection against defamation, with offences against her person treated as offences against the Crown sealed and ratified unanimously by the expanded Aulic Council on April 2, 1855. Katerina read it 3 times. Then a 4th. The words blurred through her tears. Clara hugged her. The children, not understanding exactly what was happening but feeling the emotion, began to applaud. And then, as if all of Vienna had received the news simultaneously, the bells began to ring. All 23 churches in Vienna, starting with St. Stephen's Cathedral, then spreading like waves, St. Peter's, St. Charles's, St. Michael's, St. Rupert's. 15 minutes of bells ringing in disharmonious harmony, a bronze choir announcing that something fundamental had changed. People poured into the streets. Market vendors, seamstresses, blacksmiths, teachers, prostitutes, soldiers, all looking up, listening to the bells, knowing that this music was because of her, the despised widow, the woman who did not bow. Katerina, holding a 3-year-old child in her lap, cried, not from sadness, but from a gratitude so deep it seemed to rewrite every bone in her body. Maximilian came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her. Welcome home, mein Herz, my heart. And at that moment, under the blue April sky, surrounded by orphaned children and wildflowers, Katerina understood. She had not won a title. She had won freedom, for herself and for all the women who would come after. That night, there was a celebration at the Imperial Palace. But the real celebration happened on the streets of Vienna. Poor women hung flowers in their windows. Men who worked in the factories drank to the health of the princess of the people. Children sang improvised songs. And in every district, rich and poor, noble and commoner, there was an understanding something impossible had happened. A woman, despised and nearly destroyed, had risen, and in rising, she had lifted 1,000 others with her. This was the true revolution, silent, unstoppable, born not of swords but of a dignity that refused to die. Spring 1863, the morning light filtered through the white linen curtains, painting golden patterns on the marble floor of the imperial apartments. No longer the cold, forgotten north wing, but the south wing, the most beautiful rooms in the Hofburg, with a view of the gardens where cherry trees bloomed like pink clouds settled on the earth. Katharina von Habsburg, now 34 years old, woke to the sound of children's laughter. Before she even fully opened her eyes, a smile was already forming on her lips. She recognized those voices, her children, playing in the gardens before breakfast. 3 children, against all medical odds, against all the grim predictions of the doctors who had declared her womb barren. She had conceived, not once but 3 times. 3 miracles that breathed, laughed, and filled the palace with life. Maria Theresia von Habsburg, 7 years old, was the eldest. Katharina had chosen the name deliberately, not for nostalgia or empty forgiveness, but because she understood that the greatest victory over cruelty was not hatred, but redefinition. The girl who bore the name of the cruel mother-in-law was sweet, curious, and spent hours in the hospitals with her mother, learning to change bandages and comfort the sick. The name was the same, but the soul was completely different. Leopold von Habsburg, 5 years old, had his father's blue eyes and his mother's gentle stubbornness. Named in honor of Katharina's first husband, that tragic marriage that had almost destroyed her, it was a way of saying, "You did not die in vain, and I have not forgotten." And little Sophia Margaret, 2 years old, was a whirlwind of brown, curls and laughter that echoed through the imperial corridors like bells of joy. Katharina got up barefoot and walked to the window. Down below, Maximilian was kneeling on the grass, teaching Leopold how to plant sunflower seeds. Maria Theresia was chasing butterflies. Sophia was sitting on the lap of Clara von Traunstein, now Baroness Clara von Albrecht, married and director of the Hospital of Mercy, who visited the palace twice a week. The scene was so ordinary, so simple, that Katharina had to squint to hold back tears. Simplicity, the rarest thing in an imperial palace. A maid knocked gently on the door. Lena, the same young, frightened Lena from 10 years ago, now the head of Katharina's personal maids, loyal as a faithful shadow. "Your Imperial Highness, His Majesty the Emperor requests your presence in the council chamber at 11 o'clock. Katharina turned. "The Emperor? Maximilian is the Emperor now?" Lena smiled. "Yes, Your Highness, for 2 years. Sometimes I still forget the title." Katharina smiled too. Franz Joseph I had abdicated in favor of Maximilian in 1861, citing health problems, but in truth recognizing that his nephew had the vision needed to modernize the empire. Maximilian von Habsburg became Maximilian I, Emperor of Austria, at 37, and Katharina became Empress, but she rarely used the title. She still preferred to be called the Princess of the People, the name that carried not just status, but true meaning. At 11 o'clock, Katerina entered the council chamber, no longer as a tolerated visitor or an unwelcome intruder, but as a permanent member. Her seat, an oak chair carved with phoenixes and wildflowers, was to the right of Maximilian's. The council had changed too. Of the original 16 members, only 5 remained. Baron von Albrecht had retired, some said out of shame, others out of exhaustion. New faces, younger, some even progressive, lawyers, doctors, a university professor. And for the first time in history, 3 women held permanent seats. Katerina, Clara von Traunstein, public health advisor, and Countess Elisabeth von Freiburg, expert in child education. Maximilian, now Emperor Maximilian I, stood when Katerina entered, a gesture that still caused murmurs among the more conservative. An emperor does not stand for anyone, but Maximilian always stood for her. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, "we gather today for the annual review of the institutions founded by the Imperial Princess of the People. Katerina, the numbers, please." Katerina opened a leather portfolio. Her voice was clear, firm, now accustomed to speaking in salons and on podiums. "In 10 years, we have founded 12 charitable institutions in Vienna, 7 hospitals that provide free care to any citizen, regardless of status. 3 schools for girls from poor families, where we teach not only sewing and good manners, but mathematics, literature, languages. 2 shelters for war widows, where they have housing, paid work, and dignity." She paused, her eyes scanning the council. "In the last year, we have served 3,200 people. We have trained 45 nurses, women who now have a recognized and paid profession, and we have succeeded in pushing for the passage of the Child Labor Protection Act, which prohibits factory work for children under 12. Applause. Genuine this time. But Katerina was not finished. "However, there is still much to be done. Infant mortality in poor districts remains absurd. Women still die in childbirths that could be prevented, and we need legislation to protect domestic servants from abuse, something this council has been postponing for 3 years." An uncomfortable silence. Some issues were still too sensitive. Maximilian spoke. "The Empress is right. I will present a bill in the next parliamentary session, and I expect everyone here to support it." More murmurs, but no open opposition. They no longer dared to challenge the woman who had turned the impossible into the inevitable. After the meeting, Katerina and Maximilian walked together through the imperial gardens. It was their ritual. After every council, they walked without guards, without servants, just the 2 of them. "You know I became emperor 2 years ago," Maximilian said, taking her hand. "Yes, and I became who I always was." Katerina smiled, that smile he loved, not of superficial happiness, but of deep peace. "I think we both found our true thrones." They stopped under a blooming cherry tree. Petals fell like pink snow. "Sometimes I still can't believe it," he confessed quietly, "that you are real, that this is real, that we started as a cold agreement and we became this." Katerina completed, touching his face. "Love was not born at first sight. It was born in every choice we made, to trust, to fight, to not give up on each other." Maximilian kissed her, soft, deep, full of 10 years of shared history. When they parted, he whispered, "Do you know what my greatest achievement as emperor is? It wasn't modernizing the army. It wasn't reforming the economy. It was marrying you. Because everything we have built, the laws, the institutions, the hope, it all started because one woman refused to be broken." Epilogue. The legacy. That afternoon, as the sun began to set, tinging Vienna with amber and gold, Katerina visited the Hospital of Mercy, not as empress or princess, but as she always had, in a simple apron, her hair tied back, her hands ready to work. A young woman, no more than 20, was in labor in the back room, a first pregnancy, scared, alone. Katerina stayed by her, sighed for 4 hours holding her hand, wiping her sweat, whispering encouragements. When the baby was finally born, a healthy boy with powerful lungs, the mother cried with relief and exhaustion. Katerina wrapped the child in a clean shawl and placed him in his mother's arms. "What will you name him?" Katerina asked softly. The woman looked at her with shining eyes. "Maximilian, in honor of the emperor who changed the laws so my son can go to school. And if it's a girl next time, I'll name her Katerina, in honor of you, who reminds me that women like me have value too." Katerina kissed the young mother's forehead. She said nothing, she didn't need to. Sometimes the most important words were the ones never spoken. At dusk, back at the imperial palace, Katharina found Maximilian in the library. He was reading To Their Three Children, a story about dragons and princesses who saved themselves. She stopped at the door, just watching. Maria Theresia laughed at the funny voices her father made. Leopold tried to turn the pages before it was time. Sophia was already asleep on his lap, her cheek resting against his chest. This was the revolution, not on battlefields, not with guillotines or barricades, but in an emperor reading stories to his children, in hospitals that didn't ask for coins before healing, in girls learning mathematics, in women having a voice in imperial councils. Katharina entered silently, sat on the arm of the armchair. Maximilian put his arm around her waist, continued reading without interruption, and outside, in Vienna, in every district of the city, windows glowed with candlelight. Every year, on the anniversary of the decree that made her princess of the people, the citizens lit candles in their windows, not by imperial order, not out of obligation, but because they remembered. They remembered the despised widow who became their voice. They remembered the woman who proved that compassion was not weakness, but the most powerful force of all. They remembered that dignity is not granted, it is recognized. Final words. Maria Theresia von Steinberg, the cruel mother-in-law, died 3 years earlier in Salzburg, alone, bitter, having burned all the letters of reconciliation Katharina had sent her. Her funeral had 7 attendees. Her epitaph read only, "Here lies someone who forgot that power without love is just emptiness." Archduchess Amalia von Habsburg lived in exile in Munich until her death in 1859. She tried unsuccessfully to rebuild her influence, but every letter to the Wittelsbachs went unanswered. She died alone in a rented apartment, forgotten by all who had once feared her. There was no public funeral. Her name disappeared from history like smoke. Clara von Traunstein became not only a hospital director, but the first woman to teach medicine at an Austrian university. She trained 2 generations of nurses and doctors. She lived to be 83, always saying, "Katharina taught me that friendship between women can change the world." Emperor Maximilian I reigned for 27 years. He modernized the empire, implemented social reforms that echoed throughout Europe, and was the first Austrian monarch to abolish the death penalty. But his greatest pride, he always said, was marrying the bravest woman he had ever known. And Katharina von Habsburg, imperial princess of the people, lived to be 69. She founded 32 charitable institutions throughout Austria. She trained hundreds of nurses. She saved thousands of lives. But her greatest achievement is not in numbers. Her greatest achievement was proving that a despised, broken, almost destroyed woman could rise. And in rising, she would lift all others with her. Vienna never forgot her. To this day, they say, every spring people put wildflowers in their windows. Not out of obligation, not out of empty tradition, but because they still believe in what she proved, that dignity cannot be taken. That compassion is not weakness. That true love does not begin in fairy tales, but in daily choices of respect, trust, and shared struggle. And that a single woman refusing to be silenced can change the history of millions. On that last spring night of 1863, Katharina stood at the window of her chambers, watching the candles light up across the city. Maximilian came up behind her, wrapped her in his arms. "See those lights?" he whispered against her hair. "They are for you forever." Katharina leaned against him, feeling his heart beat against her back. "No, they are for all of us. For every woman who refused to break. For every forgotten soul who was finally seen. I just had the courage to start." "Courage," he repeated, "is your softest word to describe what you are." She turned in his arms, stood on her tiptoes and kissed him. A kiss that contained 10 years of a journey, of war and peace, of pain turned into purpose, of 2 prisoners who found freedom in each other. And when they parted, Katharina looked out the window one more time. Vienna shone like a starry sky fallen to earth. And she smiled, because she finally understood. The most important love was not the one she had found in a man. It was the love she had found for herself. The love for her own strength. The love for the woman who refused to die even when the whole world wished for her silence. And that love, that impossible, fierce, unbreakable love, was what would change the world. The true throne is not made of gold and precious stones. It is made of preserved dignity, practiced compassion, and the courage to remain human in a world that insists on turning us to stone. Katharina von Habsburg, Princess of the People, 1830-1899.